It's been 1 year since the Switch 2 released, and it has become a major success for Nintendo, breaking numerous records, which includes selling nearly 20 million units in less than a year and becoming the fastest selling console not only for Nintendo, but for any console period. Something that the small loud minority of people online are losing their sleep over.
Are you even listening to me?
The Switch 2 will haunt my dreams tonight.
Now that a year has gone by, it's time to look at how well the Switch 2 holds up 1 year later, and we'll be looking at the hardware itself, its features, backwards compatibility, and the library of games. Stick around towards the end of the video to also see what the future has in store for the Switch 2's second year in the market. When it comes to the hardware, I'll be mainly talking about the technical specs because when it comes to looks, it's essentially a bigger, minimalist looking Switch at the end of the day. Nintendo once again worked with Nvidia to make the Switch 2's custom processor, which Nvidia has stated to be 10 times more powerful than the original Switch. The Switch 2 can handle up to 4K 60 frames per second HDR docked to the TV, and up to 1080p 120 frames per second HDR on both docked and handheld modes. That, along with improved performance, ray tracing, DLSS, and handheld mode's variable refresh rate, this makes for one of the Switch 2's major advantages. Nintendo's first-party games definitely took advantage of the Switch 2's improved horsepower to make games like Mario Kart World and Donkey Kong Bonanza, which started out as Switch 1 games early in their development before moving over to the Switch 2. Third-party games have also benefited from the horsepower, especially with games that took advantage of Nvidia's DLSS upscaling, which made games like Cyberpunk 2077, Final Fantasy VII Remake Intergrade, Resident Evil Requiem, and many more to look well and run stable on the platform. Now sure, these third-party games will look and run better on PC, PS5, and Xbox, but for a hybrid console where you can play on the TV and on the go seamlessly, it's very impressive. Some third-party games may have their issues due to not being well optimized for the system, but for games that are coming from companies like Square Enix and Capcom, they have definitely made an effort to optimize their games for the Switch 2, and also made the console a priority for them going forward. The improved performance also has made Switch 1 games better on Switch 2, but I'll be going more into that later on in the video. The only trade-off of this improved hardware is the battery life, which lasts around 2 to 6 hours depending on what type of game you're playing. The system does come with 256GB of internal storage, which is the highest amount of storage in any Nintendo system. But with the amount of games that have big file sizes, regardless if it's digital or through physical game keycards, it may not be enough unless you get a decently sized microSD express card to expand your storage. But overall, Nintendo did a solid job on the Switch 2's improved hardware, and delivered on a much improved experience across the board. When it comes to the features of the Switch 2, it's either a hit or a miss. One of the Switch 2's features that Nintendo has pushed consistently hard for is Game Chat, which is Nintendo's voice and video chat functionality that allows up to 12 friends to chat in a chat room, and similar to other communication apps like Discord, you can screen share your Switch 2's game screen. You can also video chat using any compatible USB camera, along with some games taking advantage of built-in camera play. While Game Chat is a nice feature to have, I only used Game Chat once with my niece, and it was a solid experience, but I don't have many friends who have a Switch 2 to make it a compelling feature to use frequently. Not to mention that you now have to buy a subscription to Switch Online to use Game Chat, as their free trial period ended a few months ago. While Nintendo has done a good job of implementing Game Chat on the Switch 2 to make it a big feature, it's not one that's a big selling point to buy a Switch 2. Another big feature is the Joy-Con 2's mouse mode, where you can use both Joy-Con 2 controllers as a mouse in certain games that support mouse controls. There's a good amount of games from both Nintendo and third-party companies that support mouse controls, even going as far as putting out SNES games on NSL Classics that support mouse controls. However, the mouse mode is more of a gimmick to me at this point. While it's nice to see support for the mouse mode so far, we've only seen it in games that are more PC or FPS-like games. We have yet to see any games that fully take advantage of dual mouse controls, with the one exception being Nintendo's own Dragon Drive, which was not received well. Not to mention, it's not comfortable to grip onto compared to a regular mouse. But one feature that I definitely appreciate is Game Share, which brings back one of the best features of the Nintendo DS and 3DS, where select Switch 2 and Switch 1 games allow you to play with others even if they don't own a copy of the game. You can link up to 3 other systems regardless if it's a Switch 2 or an original Switch system. For Switch 2 players specifically, you can also use Game Share online through a game chat lobby if it's supported. The list of games that support Game Share are growing, and I like it when this feature is supported in upcoming games. As much as I appreciate having Game Share though, I only used it once as I don't have many friends for local multiplayer sessions. While the Switch 2's new features are great to have, the average consumer may not be using them that much, especially game chat. So overall, the new features that the Switch 2 has are okay at best, with the exception of one. When the Switch 2 was announced 2 years ago in Nintendo's investor meeting, one feature that they announced right away was that the system would be backwards compatible with Switch 1 games, which was definitely necessary as Nintendo sold 155 million Switch 1 consoles at this point in time, so it would be foolish of them to leave those people behind. But what we never expected though was how much Nintendo went in on backwards compatibility overall, as most of the Switch's original library is playable both digitally and physically. Since the system uses a compatibility translation layer rather than identical original hardware, a small portion of titles have reported issues, and a select few of them are entirely incompatible. But because of the new hardware in particular, a lot of Switch 1 games now perform better on Switch 2. For example, if a game had frame rate problems on Switch 1, it's now stable and better on Switch 2. In addition, many Switch 1 games got upgraded on Switch 2, which in addition to the improved frame rates, they now run in higher resolution up to 4K and add features such as mouse controls and new content either as a free patch or as a Switch 2 edition upgrade that you have to pay for. More recently, Nintendo added a new handheld boost feature through a system update. When enabled in the system settings, it pretty much forces Switch 1 games to use their higher resolution docked mode settings while playing in handheld mode, which eliminates the blurry resolution scaling on the Switch 2's 1080p screen, providing a much sharper image while playing in handheld mode. It does come with some caveats, such as the system's touchscreen being disabled while the game is running, the Joy-Cons being treated as a detached Pro controller, and since the console is working harder to power the higher resolution on handheld, it significantly increases system power consumption and drains the battery much faster. This feature also has no effect on games that were already patched specifically for Switch 2, nor on titles that rely heavily on unique handheld motion and touchscreen controls. Since the launch of the Switch 2, we've seen all sorts of Switch 1 games receive compatibility updates and fixes, with the most recent being this past weekend, fixing compatibility with certain games. Nintendo went above and beyond to ensure that playing Switch 1 games is as smooth and better on Switch 2 as they possibly can. Having backwards compatibility at all was great enough on its own, but the extra effort they put in, like the improved performance and handheld boost mode, really makes this the best feature of the Switch 2, and it's definitely the unsung hero of the system itself. Now this leads into the most important part, the Switch 2's own library of games. When it comes to Nintendo's first-party output in the Switch 2's first year, we got Mario Kart World, Switch 2 Welcome Tour, Donkey Kong Bonanza, Dragon Drive, Pokemon Legends ZA, Hyrule Warriors Age of Imprisonment, Kirby Air Riders, Metroid Prime 4 Beyond, Mario Tennis Fever, Pokemon Pokopia, and Yoshi and the Mysterious Book. In addition to the actual exclusives, Nintendo also put out upgraded Switch 2 edition versions of Zelda Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, Mario Party Jamboree, Kirby and the Forgotten Land, Animal Crossing New Horizons, Mario Wonder, and Xenoblade Chronicles X. While there's a great lineup of games that Nintendo has put out so far, the third-party games that the Switch 2 has gotten so far have been really strong, with games like Pragmata, Resident Evil Requiem, Hades 2, Hollow Knight Silksong, Split Fiction, Final Fantasy VII Remake Intergrade, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, Cyberpunk 2077, Monster Hunter Stories 3, Indiana Jones and the Great Circle, Hitman World of Assassination, Assassin's Creed Shadows, and a lot more. While a lot of the games that I mentioned and more have been out on other systems and PC before the Switch 2 came out, I would say that this is the biggest amount of support from third-party companies that any console from Nintendo has ever gotten since the Super Nintendo, with a lot of them like Pragmata and Resident Evil Requiem launching day and date on Switch 2 alongside the PS5, Xbox, and PC versions. Of course, most people buy Nintendo consoles just for Nintendo games, and when comparing their lineup for the Switch 2's first year with the Switch 1's first year, it's almost equal in terms of output and quality, but in my opinion, the Switch 1's first year lineup from Nintendo just narrowly beats out the Switch 2's, as within the first year of the Switch 1, we had Zelda Breath of the Wild and Super Mario Odyssey, with the former launching alongside the console, which became a generation-defining title. While the Switch 1's third-party support was low in its first year compared to the Switch 2, those two major hitters alone make the Switch 1's first year better in terms of first-party. Now, it doesn't mean that what Nintendo has put out so far for the Switch 2 is bad, like far from it, but it didn't set the world on fire like the Switch 1's lineup did in its first year. Now, the third-party support on Switch 2 definitely trumps the Switch 1's first year by a long shot, thanks to the improved power, and I also ended up playing a lot more third-party games on the Switch 2 than any other Nintendo system prior. So when it comes to the Switch 2's overall first-year lineup with both first-party and third-party games, it has been a solid first year, and combine that with the Switch 1's catalog being playable, you can't go wrong with the library that the Switch 2 offers. The system's first year in the market has been quite interesting, and now that we're in year 2, the question that's in all of our minds right now is what the future holds for the Switch 2. And depending on how you look at it, it's more of a good news, bad news situation across the board. For one, the Switch 2 has just experienced a price increase in Japan last week, while North America and Europe are preparing to have a price increase on September 1st, with the reason more than likely due to the global memory chip shortage thanks to the boom of generative AI. However, it's quite clear that Nintendo didn't want to have a price increase this early in the Switch 2's life, as Nintendo's global president Shintaro Furukawa apologizing for the trouble that this price increase will cause for future consumers. In a time where every current gaming device is getting price increases, regardless if it's PC, console, or handheld, it truly sucks. And while Nintendo didn't want to go down this path, they also have come up with some plans. Recently, they released a new Switch 2 Choose Your Game bundle for $500, where consumers can choose to have a digital copy of either Mario Kart World, Donkey Kong Bonanza, or Pokemon Pokopia, which all three of them are best sellers on the Switch 2. This bundle is a great incentive for those who are looking to buy a system before the price increase goes into effect, which would be $500 on its own in September. Furukawa also stated that Nintendo's plan to overcome this barrier is by preparing a robust software lineup to enhance the Switch 2's ownership value. In terms of what's coming soon for the Switch 2 from Nintendo, we have Star Fox releasing at the end of this month. Next month sees the release of Splatoon Raiders. Fire Emblem Fortune's Weaves releases sometime before the end of this year. And we know nothing else on what Nintendo is bringing for the rest of the year and into 2027, as they never announced anything else outside of Pokemon Winds and Waves, which is more than likely going to be a holiday 2027 release. We're also in the month of June, where Nintendo should be having their big General Nintendo Direct. So here's hoping that it actually happens, and by then, we're definitely going to know what Nintendo has for us in store for the Switch 2's second year. But what also helps on the game side of things is their new pricing strategy that just went into effect when Yoshi and the Mysterious Book came out a few weeks ago, where all Switch 2 games from Nintendo from this point forward will be $10 cheaper digitally on the eShop, and their games have been decently priced lately, ranging from $50 to $60 digitally, which is quite better than them charging $70 for certain games, or in the case of Mario Kart World, $80, even though most of us paid $50 for the game when we bought that initial bundle. In terms of third-party support for year 2, in terms of both multi-platform and exclusives, we have a lot. The Orbitals, Dusk Bloods, Final Fantasy XIV, 007 First Light, and also the latest Call of Duty game, which will be launching day and date on Switch 2 this October with crossplay and Joy-Con 2 mouse controls, marking the series' return to a Nintendo platform in nearly 13 years. The original Switch system revitalized Nintendo after the commercial failure of the Wii U, and helped create their most popular console of all time. The Switch 2 may just be an improved Switch across the board, but that's what people wanted, And that's what we got. Its first year has already proved that the Switch 2 is a worthy successor, even if it launched in a worse time where everything in the world is becoming much more costly across the board. The Switch 2 does have a major advantage going into year 2, as even with the price increase, it is still one of the cheaper consoles to buy on the market. If you haven't bought one yet and are thinking about buying one, now is the perfect time to do so, especially before the price increase goes into effect. No doubt that Nintendo already has some great titles on the way that they haven't announced yet, and I'm looking forward to playing them for years to come. As long as you don't listen to any of the grifters online.
Are you even listening to me?
The Switch 2 will haunt my dreams tonight.